Kicked out by my son, I used my secret to take back everything they stole. True story. Have you ever felt completely invisible, taken for granted, or utterly underestimated by the very people you loved and trusted the most? Have you ever watched the child you devoted your life to cast you aside for the person they married? Have you seen them become a stranger, their eyes cold, their loyalty shifted entirely to another, even as that other person openly humiliates you, discards you, makes you feel less than nothing? I have. I lived through it, every agonizing moment. But they didn't know, did they? They had no idea that I, Serafina, the woman they thought they could break, would be the one to write the final chapter of their story. And let me tell you, it wasn't a fairy tale ending for them. Not by a long shot. The air in the living room was thick, not just with the cloying, sickly sweet scent of Bryony's expensive perfume, a scent that always clung to her like a second skin, a testament to her excessive nature, but with an oppressive, suffocating tension that made it difficult to draw a full breath. It was the afternoon of my 75th birthday, a day that should have been filled with quiet joy, perhaps a small family gathering with the scent of my favorite lemon cake baking and soft laughter echoing through these familiar rooms. Instead, it became the stage for my ultimate degradation, a cruel, meticulously orchestrated play in which I was the unwilling, bewildered protagonist. Bryony, my daughter-in-law, stood before me, her smile a shark's grin, wide and predatory, her eyes glittering with a malicious triumph that sent a shiver down my spine. She held a stack of papers, official-looking documents with bold headings and legal jargon, though I couldn't make out the specifics from where I sat, trembling slightly on my favorite armchair. The old velvet, usually so comforting, now felt cold beneath my fingers. Kalen, my own son, stood beside her, rigid and unblinking, like a statue carved from stone. His posture was stiff, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my left shoulder, his jaw clenched. His silence, that dreadful, complicit silence, was a wound deeper than any accusation Bryony could hurl. It was a betrayal etched in the very air, more agonizing than any spoken word. "Mother Serafina," Bryony began, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, a saccharine tone that grated on my nerves, loud enough for the two burly men who had just entered the house, uninvited, to hear every word. They were dressed in dark, nondescript suits, their faces impassive, their presence immediately chilling. "We've been so worried about you. Haven't we, darling?" She nudged Kalen, who gave a pathetic, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture so weak it was like a knife twisting in my heart. "Your memory, it's just not what it used to be. Forgetting things, wandering off, it's a sign, you know. We just want what's best for you." My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape, its wings beating frantically against the cage of my chest. A metallic taste filled my mouth. "What are you talking about, Bryony?" I demanded, my voice weak, my throat suddenly dry, as if all moisture had been siphoned from my body. "My memory is perfectly fine. I know exactly what you're trying to do. This is absurd." But she just laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound, like shattered glass. "Oh, Serafina, dear, that's exactly what someone with cognitive decline would say. Denial, it's a classic symptom. Kalen and I have been so concerned, we've spoken to a specialist. Very concerned. Very, very concerned." She gestured grandly at the two men, who now moved closer, their large frames casting long shadows, their presence intimidating, their faces impassive. One of them carried a small bag, like a doctor's, though I knew instinctively he was no doctor. "These kind gentlemen are here to help you get settled into a more appropriate living arrangement. For your own safety, you understand. You wouldn't want to hurt yourself, or wander off, now would you?" My blood ran cold, a glacial current seizing my veins. "Living arrangement? What are you saying? This is my home. My home that Robert and I built together. You can't. I looked to Kalen, my son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of my being, the man I had loved unconditionally, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose triumphs I'd celebrated, whose every need I had prioritized. His eyes, once so full of warmth for me, filled with the bright spark of childhood curiosity and later, youthful ambition, were now vacant, almost glazed over, devoid of any recognition or emotion. He shifted his weight nervously, avoiding my gaze, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, as if he were trying to disappear into himself. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He wouldn't speak. The silence from him was a scream in my ears, a testament to a betrayal so profound it shattered the very foundations of my world. It was betrayal personified. "Oh, but we can, Serafina," Bryony purred, taking a step closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper meant for the two men, a conspiratorial tone that made my skin crawl. "She gets confused, you see. Thinks this old place is still hers. Bless her heart. But Kaylin and I, we've taken over the affairs. Power of attorney, signed and sealed." She held up a document, waving it like a victorious flag, a taunt. I knew, even in my shock, that it was a lie. A bold, audacious lie. I had never signed any such thing, not to them, not to anyone. Robert had made sure of that. The men, grim and efficient, began to close in, one on either side of my armchair. One of them spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle but firm, devoid of any warmth. "Ma'am, it's for your own good. We're here to assist you." "Assist me?" I shrieked, my voice finding a sudden, desperate strength, fueled by a surge of pure terror and indignation. "You're kidnapping me. Kaylin, tell them. Tell them this is wrong. Tell them." I reached out a trembling hand towards him, pleading, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces with each second of his silence. A single tear, hot and stinging, traced a path down my cheek. He didn't move. He didn't utter a sound. He just stood there, a silent sentinel of my despair, watching, allowing it to happen. Bryony stepped between us, cutting off my desperate reach, her perfume assaulting my senses once more. "Enough, Serafina. You're upsetting yourself. And everyone else. It's time to go." She snapped her fingers at the men, a sharp, dismissive sound. They took my arms, not roughly, but with an unyielding grip that squeezed the last vestiges of hope from me. I tried to pull away, to fight, to claw, but my strength was no match for theirs. My dignity was being ripped from me, shred by agonizing shred, right there in my own living room, the room where Robert and I had shared so many tender moments, where Kaylin had taken his first steps. As they half carried, half escorted me towards the front door, my gaze lingered on the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger Robert, Kaylin as a beaming toddler, and me, radiant with love. The image mocked my present reality. I heard Bryony's voice, clear and triumphant, behind me, echoing with a chilling finality. "And don't worry about coming back, Serafina. We'll be changing the locks immediately. This house is ours now. Exclusively ours." The clinking sound of keys, new keys, keys that weren't mine, echoed in the hallway, a cruel symphony of dispossession. I was outside, in my own front yard, the crisp autumn air biting at my exposed skin, but the cold inside me was far worse. A deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to permeate my very soul. The men guided me to a waiting car, its windows tinted an opaque black, its presence ominous, like a hearse come to claim the living. As the door opened, I caught one last glimpse of my home, the place where I had raised my family, where I had loved, laughed, and grieved. My rose bushes, which I had carefully tended for decades, seemed to droop in silent sympathy. And then I saw Bryony, standing on the porch, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face, her eyes glinting with victory. And Kaylin, still silent, still watching, a shadow of the son I once knew, a stranger in his own skin, standing beside her, a co-conspirator in my ruin. The front door, my front door, slammed shut with a resounding thud, echoing the finality of my expulsion, a thunderclap of betrayal. As the car pulled away, I watched them, two figures shrinking in the distance, standing in what they believed was their new kingdom. My humiliation was complete. My patience, however, a well that had seemed bottomless, was finally, irrevocably exhausted. They had pushed me too far. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. If only that public humiliation, that cruel, calculated act of dispossession, had been the first instance of their callousness. No, my dear, this was merely the crescendo, the grand finale of years of insidious manipulation and escalating disrespect. It began subtly, like a slow poison seeping into the foundations of my life, eroding my peace, my dignity, and most painfully, my relationship with my own son. It started not long after Kaylin married Bryony, perhaps 15 years ago now. I remember the day he introduced her, a whirlwind of blonde hair and effusive compliments. At first, she was charming, almost excessively so. Mother Serafina, she'd coo, her voice syrupy sweet, bringing me overly elaborate bouquets of flowers that always seemed to shed petals everywhere, or insisting on cooking me dinner, though her attempts were usually disastrous, leaving my kitchen a mess and me quietly reheating a proper meal later. I, a naive fool, yearning for a daughter, thought I had gained a wonderful addition to our small family. How utterly wrong I was. The first red flag, though I didn't recognize it then, was how quickly she began to isolate Kaylin from our family traditions, from his old friends, from me. Weekend dinners, once sacred, a time for laughter and storytelling around my dining table, became too complicated because Bryony had other, supposedly more exciting, plans. Family holidays were suddenly spent with her family, often in exotic locations she made sure to post on social media. Kaylin, who had always been so connected, so loyal, slowly, imperceptibly, began to drift. He'd make excuses for Bryony, defend her quirks with a shrug and a dismissive wave of his hand, and gradually, his eyes would glaze over when I brought up shared memories of his childhood or stories about his father, as if trying to erase them, rewrite our history to exclude me. He stopped calling regularly, his visits became scarce, and when he did come, he was often distracted, his phone constantly vibrating with messages from Bryony. Then came the financial advice. Bryony, ever so concerned about my well-being, suggested I simplify my affairs. "It's just too much for you to manage, Serafina," she'd say, her brow furrowed with feigned worry, her voice laced with an insinuation of my declining capabilities. "All those bills, the investments, the property taxes, the insurance policies. Kaylin and I are so good with numbers. Let us help. It would take such a burden off your shoulders." And like an idiot, trusting their good intentions, I allowed them to take over some of my utility bills, simple things at first, just to help me out. But it was a slippery slope. Soon, they were managing my bank statements, my property taxes, my investment accounts, always with a reassuring pat on the hand, always with Kaylin's silent nod of approval. He'd just say, "Mom, it's easier this way. Bryony's just trying to help." Looking back, I see now it was the slow, deliberate untying of my financial independence, making me reliant on them, preparing the ground for total control, for this very moment. The house, this beautiful home that my late husband, Robert, and I had built together brick by brick, filled with love and laughter, became a battleground. Bryony began to treat it as her own, even while I was still living in it. She'd rearrange furniture, often expensive pieces she bought without consulting me, paint walls in jarring colors without asking, throw out cherished heirlooms because they didn't fit her aesthetic. She even tried to remove Robert's favorite armchair from his study, claiming it was too old and dusty, only backing down after my rare, furious outburst. I remember one particularly painful incident. I had a collection of antique teacups, a gift from my grandmother, each one delicate and precious, a tangible link to my own past. Bryony, during one of her redecorating sprees, simply tossed them into a donation box, saying with a dismissive wave of her hand, "Oh, these old things? So dusty. We need something more modern, don't you think, Kaylin?" Kaylin, as always, just shrugged, "A week, whatever you think, Bryony." My heart ached, not just for the teacups, but for the son who stood by, allowing his wife to dismantle my life, piece by piece, memory by memory. When I confronted him later, tears in my eyes, he simply said, "Mom, it's just stuff. Bryony means well. She's just trying to make the house feel more us. Us. Not me. Not our family. Just us." The message was clear. I was no longer part of their us. I was an inconvenient relic. I became the housemaid in my own home. Bryony would leave her clothes strewn across the living room, expect me to pick them up. She'd pile dishes in the sink after elaborate meals she never cooked, knowing I'd eventually wash them. "Oh, Serafina, you're just so good at this sort of thing. Your house always looks so neat," she'd chirp, as if she were complimenting a skill, not exploiting my kindness and my inability to live in a perpetual state of chaos. One time, she even handed me her dirty laundry, a pile of delicate silks and cashmere, and said, "Can you just pop these in the wash for me, Mother Serafina? And be careful, they're very expensive. Don't ruin them." Kalen was in the room, watching television, completely oblivious or simply uncaring, his eyes glued to the screen. I felt a flush of shame, of degradation so profound I could barely breathe. But what could I do? Where could I go? I was alone, and this was my home. Or so I thought. The way they spoke to me also changed. Bryony's initial sweetness curdled into thinly veiled contempt. She'd openly mock my opinions, my taste in clothes. "Oh, Serafina, that dress is so quaint." My hobbies: still knitting, Serafina. Don't you ever do anything modern? If I tried to tell a story about Robert, about our life together, she'd yawn loudly or interrupt with a trivial anecdote about her own day, or even worse, about a celebrity she admired. "Oh, Serafina, not that story again. It's a bit tiresome, don't you think? Kalen, remember that time we..." Kalen would occasionally give me a fleeting, apologetic look, a quick glance of discomfort, but never, not once, did he challenge her. He became her shadow, her echo, her silent accomplice. His silence, that damning, agonizing silence, became my constant companion, a heavy blanket of sorrow draped over my shoulders, smothering me. I remember one Christmas. I had spent weeks knitting Kalen a beautiful scarf, his favorite color, a deep forest green, carefully selecting the softest wool. I poured all my remaining love for him into every stitch. Bryony had given him a designer watch, encrusted with diamonds, something ostentatious and flashy. When he opened my gift, Bryony snorted, "A scarf? How quaint, Serafina. Doesn't he have enough of those?" Kalen, instead of thanking me, just mumbled, "Oh, thanks, Mom. It's nice," his voice flat, devoid of real appreciation. And then he immediately put on the watch, admiring it on his wrist, completely ignoring my handcrafted gift, tossing the scarf aside as if it were an old rag. The message was clear: my efforts, my love, my very presence, were deemed quaint, old-fashioned, disposable. I tried, in my own way, to talk to Kalen. I'd pull him aside, when Bryony wasn't around, desperately trying to find the son I knew. "Kalen, darling," I'd plead, my voice barely a whisper, "I feel like I'm losing you. And Bryony, she's changed. She's not kind to me. Don't you see how she treats me?" He'd always deflect, always minimize. "Mom, you're being sensitive. Bryony's just direct. You know how busy we are. It's just how things are now. You're getting older, things change." Just how things are now, that phrase became his mantra, his excuse for everything, a cold, hard wall between us, built brick by brick with Bryony's influence. He had chosen his wife over his mother, not just in affection, but in basic human decency. He had allowed her to slowly, systematically strip me of my identity, my worth, and my place in my own home. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible, unheard, unwanted. Every day was a battle to maintain a shred of dignity, to pretend I wasn't hurt, to pretend Kalen's silence didn't crush my soul. They thought I was old, frail, perhaps a little senile, easily manipulated, easily dismissed. They thought I had no fight left in me. They thought they had one. They were so wrong. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband, Robert, left me. Robert, bless his foresight, was a man who understood human nature better than anyone I had ever known. He possessed an uncanny ability to see through veneers, to sense the underlying currents of greed and self-interest in people. He knew, even then, the potential for greed to corrupt, the way love could twist into something ugly and possessive. He had seen it in other families, stories whispered over coffee, and perhaps, with an intuition I didn't possess at the time, he sensed the lurking darkness in Bryony's character, even when she was still putting on her charming facade. A year before he passed, when his illness had already begun to claim its toll but his mind remained sharp as ever, he called me into his study. It was a room he rarely used, filled with dusty books on philosophy and history, the comforting scent of old paper and polished wood. He looked tired, his face etched with the weariness of his declining health, but his eyes were sharp, determined, burning with an intense purpose. "Serafina," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if sharing a sacred confidence, "I've made some adjustments to our estate. Nothing drastic, just ensuring your future is secure, no matter what happens, no matter who comes into Kaelin's life." He opened a hidden compartment in his desk, a secret drawer I never knew existed, concealed behind a false panel and the intricate carving. From within, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder, worn at the edges but still exuding an air of importance. Inside were several documents, crisp and official, bound with green ribbons. "This," he said, tapping the top document with a gnarled finger, his gaze unwavering, "is the deed to this house, the entire property, the land, everything. In your name, solely. Effective immediately. I had it transferred last month." My eyes widened in surprise and a little confusion. We had always owned it jointly, as a married couple. "And this," he continued, pointing to another document, a solemn expression on his face, "is a revised will. It states, unequivocally, that all liquid assets, all our investments, all our shares in Peterson Industries, the family business I built, are to be held in a trust for your sole benefit, managed by a third-party trustee of your choosing, should anything happen to me. Kaelin is provided for, of course, with his own inheritance set aside, separate from this. A substantial sum, enough to set him up for life if he's wise with it. But the bulk, the true security, the ultimate protection, is yours." He looked at me, his gaze piercing, filled with a love and concern that transcended words. "Serafina, I've seen enough of the world to know that sometimes, family isn't always what it seems. Promises fade. Loyalties shift. This is your safeguard. Your independence. Your trump card, should you ever need it. Don't ever forget it's there. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." He then showed me the name of the law firm he had worked with, Davies and Associates, a firm known for its discretion, its integrity, and its meticulous attention to detail. "They have copies of everything. They know every clause, every condition. They know everything." I remembered feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. Why so secretive? Why such a drastic measure? Robert simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Just trust me, my love. It's for your peace of mind. For your future. For the day, God forbid, when you might need to protect yourself." He made me memorize the contact details for the law firm, the specific attorney, Mr. Davies, and where the original documents were stored in a secure, off-site vault. He made me promise I would never mention it to Kaelin, or anyone else, unless it was absolutely necessary, unless my very well-being depended on it. It was our secret, a profound testament to his enduring love and foresight. For 15 years, through all of Bryony's machinations, all of Kaelin's distant silence, that folder remained untouched, that secret locked away in the deepest recesses of my mind. It was a comforting weight, a silent assurance that I wasn't entirely defenseless. It was my quiet strength. But I never considered using it. Not really. I kept hoping Kaelin would wake up, that Bryony would somehow see the error of her ways, that we could return to some semblance of a normal, loving family. I endured, I absorbed, I suffered, always holding on to that fragile thread of hope, believing that love and patience would eventually prevail. Until the moment they threw me out. Until Bryony's triumphant sneer as she declared my home theirs. Until Kaelin's spineless silence echoed the death of any hope I had left for him, for us. As the tinted car drove me away from the only home I had ever known as an adult, the shock slowly gave way to a cold, burning rage. My shattered dignity, the sheer audacity of their betrayal, the cold, calculating cruelty of their actions, crystallized into a single, unyielding resolve. Robert's words echoed in my mind, a beacon in the darkness. Asterisk, your trump card, should you ever need it. Asterisk. And in that moment, in the back of that silent car, watching my life disappear in the rearview mirror, watching my beautiful home vanish from sight, I knew. I knew with absolute clarity that the time had come. My patience, a well that had seemed bottomless, had finally run dry. They had crossed a line, a sacred, unforgivable line. This wasn't just about property or money anymore, it was about respect, about humanity, about the fundamental right to one's own life, to one's own sanctuary. And they had stripped me of it all, leaving me feeling like an empty husk. But they hadn't stripped me of my secret. Not yet. The decision was made. Not with tears, but with a fierce, burning resolve that solidified in my very bones. I would not just reclaim what was mine, I would ensure they understood the true cost of their greed, the irreparable damage their cruelty had wrought. They wanted to write me out of their story? Fine. But I would be the author of their downfall. And it would be a meticulously planned, devastatingly effective, brutal lesson they would never forget. Robert's trump card was about to be played. The first few days after my forced eviction were a blur of numb shock, a haze of disbelieving pain. The more appropriate living arrangement Bryony had spoken of was a small, clinical room in a facility she had clearly prearranged, a place designed for those truly in need of constant care, not for an independent woman like me. It felt like a prison, sterile and impersonal, the scent of antiseptic replacing the familiar aromas of my own kitchen. It was a stark contrast to the warmth of my home, a stark reminder of the freedom they had stolen from me. But the fog of humiliation soon lifted, replaced by a steely clarity, a cold, unwavering determination. I was Serafina. I was not broken. And I had a plan. The very next morning, from a borrowed phone in the facility's common room, a clunky old rotary phone with a long cord, I made the call. It was to the law firm Robert had instructed me to contact, Davies and Associates, the one whose details I had meticulously memorized over the years, a lifeline held in reserve. Mr. Davies, the senior partner, answered. His voice was calm, professional, and within minutes, after I identified myself and gave him Robert's old account number, I felt a surge of immense relief. He remembered Robert, remembered the specific instructions, remembered me. Mrs. Peterson, he said, his voice grave, understanding instantly the gravity of my situation, I understand the situation you find yourself in. Your husband was a man of great foresight and meticulous planning. All the necessary documentation is securely held here, just as he arranged. We can proceed at your direction. I want everything back, Mr. Davies, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within me, none of the years of pain. Every single thing they took. My home, my financial independence. And I want them to learn a lesson they will never forget. A lesson about consequences and respect. He understood. He didn't need me to explain the years of torment, the slow, insidious betrayal. He simply said, with a quiet confidence that filled me with a rare sense of peace, "Consider it handled, Mrs. Peterson. We will move swiftly and decisively. Justice will be served." And then, the day came. The day everything would be laid bare. It wasn't a dramatic family dinner, no grand confrontation in the house they believed was theirs. That would have given them too much power, too much opportunity to grandstand, to deflect, to lie. No, this was far more precise, far more devastatingly legal, a surgical strike. It began with a notice. A formal, official notice, delivered by a stern-faced court bailiff to Kaylin and Bryony at the house they had usurped. It was a summons, not to court, but to a mandatory meeting with Mr. Davies, my attorney, within 48 hours. The reason stated was urgent family estate matters. I knew the shock this would cause. They would assume it was some minor formality, perhaps a final hurdle to clear before they truly consolidated their control over what they thought was theirs. They would walk in, smug and assured, certain of their victory. I, of course, was already there when they arrived at Mr. Davies' opulent office, a grand space with towering bookshelves and dark, polished with that exuded power and gravitas. I sat calmly, positioned strategically so that I would be the first thing they saw, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, as they were ushered in. Bryony, in a ridiculously expensive designer suit, far too flashy for a legal office, strutted in first, her face a mask of patronizing concern, a condescending pout on her lips. Mother Serafina. What a surprise. Are you feeling better? This meeting seems a bit unnecessary, doesn't it? I hope we haven't pulled Mr. Davies away from more important cases. She glanced dismissively at Mr. Davies, then at me, as if I were a child who had called an unnecessary meeting. Kalen followed, looking uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched, avoiding my eyes as always, seemingly shrinking in Bryony's shadow. Mr. Davies, a man with a quiet authority that commanded instant respect, cleared his throat, his gaze piercing. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, thank you for coming. Mrs. Serafina Peterson has retained my services to address some irregularities concerning her estate. Bryony scoffed, a short, sharp sound. Irregularities? There are no irregularities, Mr. Davies. Everything is perfectly in order. We have the power of attorney, we've taken over the bills, the house is in our name, well, Kalen's name, soon to be joint, of course. She gave a condescending smirk, a practiced gesture of false sympathy. Serafina, bless her heart, has been a bit confused lately. We're just helping her. It's what good children do for their aging parents, isn't it? Mr. Davies' gaze sharpened, his blue eyes turning to chips of ice. He leaned forward slightly, his voice losing its initial polite tone, becoming a precise, legal instrument, each word delivered with the weight of absolute truth. Mrs. Peterson, I assure you, there is no confusion on Serafina's part. And as for the house being in your name, Mrs. Peterson, that is factually incorrect. Bryony's smirk faltered, her perfectly painted lips parting slightly. Her face drained of color, going from a rosy flush to a sickly pale. Kalen finally looked up, a flicker of unease, then dawning horror, in his eyes. Allow me to clarify, Mr. Davies continued, picking up a document from his desk, its pages rustling softly. This is the original deed for the property located at 14 Elmwood Lane. As of 17 years ago, this property was solely, unequivocally, and irrevocably transferred into the name of Serafina Peterson, by her late husband, Robert Peterson, a man of remarkable foresight, I might add. He placed the deed on the polished table, sliding it towards them with a deliberate, precise motion. There is no joint ownership. There is no transfer of ownership to Kalen Peterson. This house, legally and entirely, belongs to Serafina Peterson. It always has. Your claims are entirely without merit. Bryony's face was now ashen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a faint, choked gasp. Kalen's eyes were wide with shock, staring at the document as if it were a venomous snake coiled to strike, his breath catching in his throat. Furthermore, Mr. Davies pressed on, allowing them no time to recover, to formulate any defense. Your claims of power of attorney are baseless. Serafina Peterson has never granted you, or anyone else, power of attorney over her affairs. Any document you possess to that effect is a forgery and will be treated as such, with all the serious legal ramifications that entail. He then produced another set of documents, equally pristine. These are the trust documents. All of Robert Peterson's liquid assets, investments, and shares in Peterson Industries were placed into a trust managed by a neutral third party for Serafina Peterson's exclusive benefit. Kalen Peterson was provided with a separate, distinct inheritance upon his father's passing, which he received in full. Beyond that, he has no claim to his mother's assets, nor does his spouse. The silence in the room was deafening, thick and heavy, broken only by Bryony's ragged gasp, a sound of utter disbelief. Her eyes darted frantically between Mr. Davies, the damning documents on the table, and finally, me. The look of shock on her face was exquisite. It was a mixture of disbelief, raw betrayal, and dawning horror, a perfect cocktail of ruin. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop, her expensive suit suddenly looked cheap, garish, and utterly out of place. The facade had crumbled. And Kalen, his face was a portrait of raw, agonizing regret. He looked like a small boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar had just exploded in his face, spraying him with the bitter crumbs of his own complicity. His eyes, for the first time in years, met mine, and in them, I saw not just shock, but a raw, agonizing remorse, a flash of the kind, loving son he once was, before Bryony. He understood, in that devastating moment, what he had done, what he had allowed to happen. He understood the monumental mistake he had made in trusting Bryony's lies, in casting me aside, in choosing a gilded cage over genuine love. You knew? Bryony stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me, her voice raspy, barely audible. All this time, you knew? And you let us? I let you show me exactly who you are, Bryony, I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion, a cold blade of truth. And I let Kaylan show me exactly how little his mother meant to him. I let you dig your own grave. Mr. Davies then laid out the consequences, cold and hard, without a hint of compassion. Effective immediately, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, you are to vacate the property at 14 Elmwood Lane. A locksmith will arrive in 2 hours to change the locks for Mrs. Seraphina Peterson. Any personal belongings you wish to retrieve must be removed under the supervision of my associate. Furthermore, any funds you have unlawfully accessed from Seraphina Peterson's accounts, or any expenditures made using her assets without her consent, will be fully investigated and recouped, with interest. This includes any renovations or improvements you've made to the property, as they were not authorized by the legal owner. This office will be pursuing all available legal avenues to reclaim what was taken. Bryony looked like she was about to explode, her face now mottled red, a furious flush creeping up her neck. You can't do this. We'll fight this. This is our life. You're ruining us. This is my life, Bryony, I interjected, my voice rising slightly, infused with years of suppressed anger, with the weight of every slight, every humiliation. And you tried to steal it. You tried to throw me out of my own home, accuse me of dementia, and claim what was never yours. You thought I was old and weak. You thought I had no fight left. You underestimated me. You underestimated Robert. Kaylan finally spoke, his voice hoarse, broken, a mere whisper. Mom. I didn't know. I swear, she told me, she said it was all arranged. She told you what you wanted to hear, Kaylan, I said, looking at him, my heart a hollow ache, a cavern of lost love. And you chose to believe her. You chose to abandon me. You stood there and watched them drag me from my home. You said nothing. You did nothing. And that, my dear son, is the unforgivable sin. That is what cannot be mended. Mr. Davies stood, signaling the end of the meeting, his posture conveying the finality of the proceedings. The legal process has begun. You will receive further notices. I suggest you seek independent legal counsel immediately. This meeting is concluded. As Bryony sputtered, a torrent of desperate, angry words, Kaylan sat slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands, his entire body trembling. The look of utter devastation on their faces, the dawning realization of everything they had lost, everything they were about to lose, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was a cold, hard justice, a necessary reckoning. So where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Well, Bryony and Kaylan were forced to vacate the house that very day. The locksmith arrived precisely on schedule, and the locks were changed, the old keys they had so triumphantly dangled, rendered useless. And I, Seraphina, the woman they tried to discard, walked back into my home, my head held high, my heart filled with a quiet, resolute strength. It felt different. Not just because of the new locks, but because the oppressive presence of their greed, their deceit, their callousness, had been lifted. It felt clean. It felt mine again. Their downfall was swift and brutal, a cascade of consequences. With no house, and Bryony having quit her job years ago, relying entirely on Kaylan's meager inheritance and what they thought they'd gain from me, they suddenly had nowhere to go and no means to sustain their lavish lifestyle. Mr. Davies' team meticulously traced every penny of my money they had misused, every unauthorized transaction, Every improvement Bryony had made to my house that they now had to pay for, every expensive painting she had bought for my walls, every new piece of furniture. The financial penalties were crippling. They had to sell almost everything they owned, their fancy cars, Bryony's designer clothes and jewelry, even Kaylin's expensive watches, just to cover the restitution and the mounting legal fees. Kaylin's separate inheritance, which his father had wisely set aside for him and was meant to be his foundation, his start in life, was quickly eaten away by legal fees and their mounting debts. Bryony, seeing her gilded cage collapse, seeing her dreams of endless wealth evaporate, turned on Kaylin with a fury that mirrored her earlier saccharine sweetness, amplified by desperation. Their marriage, built on a shaky foundation of greed and manipulation, crumbled under the crushing weight of their ruin. I heard through the grapevine, from a sympathetic neighbor who still visited me, that Bryony left Kaylin, blaming him for everything, for not having been smart enough to secure my assets, for not having known Robert's secret. She vanished as quickly as she had appeared, leaving a trail of debt and recrimination. Kaylin, stripped of his home, his wife, his lavish lifestyle, and his pride, was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own inaction. He had to move into a tiny, rented apartment in a less desirable part of town, and took a low-paying job, a stark contrast to the life he thought he was entitled to. He was alone, and utterly broken. The lesson they learned? It was etched in the bitter reality of their destitution, in the emptiness of their new lives. Bryony learned that cunning and cruelty, when met with prepared foresight and unwavering resolve, lead to absolute ruin. She learned that true wealth isn't just about money, but about integrity and respect, two things she utterly lacked. Kaylin learned the devastating consequences of spinelessness, of allowing another to dictate his morals, of choosing comfort and convenience over courage and conviction. He learned that silence, in the face of injustice, makes one complicit, and that complicity comes with a heavy, unforgiving price. He lost not just his inheritance, but the respect of his mother, a bond that can never be truly mended, a wound too deep to heal. As for me, my life has found a serenity I hadn't known in years. I've reconnected with old friends, tended to my garden, filled my home with the laughter of new, genuine connections, and slowly, deliberately, reclaimed the peace and joy that Bryony and Kaylin tried to steal. My home, my sanctuary, is truly mine again, filled with memories I cherish, not tainted by their oppressive presence. I live comfortably, securely, thanks to Robert's wisdom and my own rediscovered strength. I am free. This experience taught me a profound truth: never test anyone's patience to its limits, especially not someone you believe to be weak or vulnerable. Because sometimes, the quiet ones, the ones who absorb all the blows, who seem to suffer in silence, are the ones holding the biggest secret, the deadliest weapon. And when they finally decide to unleash it, the consequences are utterly, irrevocably devastating. Always remember, respect is not given, it is earned. And when it is violated, when kindness is mistaken for weakness, the consequences can strip you of everything you thought you had. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to be cast aside? Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from those you loved most? My channel is filled with stories just like this, stories of resilience, of reclaiming power, and of the harsh but necessary life lessons learned along the way. If you found solace or strength in my story, please consider subscribing. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another chapter of life's unwritten rules. And most importantly, share your own troubles, your own triumphs, and your thoughts in the comments below. You are not alone.